forgive me for clearing my throat multiple times this morning. I am not feeling as well as I can, and I'm trying to, what did he say? Ration out my vocals. I'm just hoping that they are able to continue throughout the day. We are in the book of Romans, chapter 14. And we began talking about differences in Christ, differences in the churches. In particular, in Romans 14, there were Jews and Gentiles who had different cultural differences. Then we talked about how we come from different walks of life. Some of us have grown up in the church, some of us haven't. Some of us have things that to us are sin, but they're not to other people. And we discussed the differences, and God is calling for unity. Some believe that there is an advantage of not growing up in the church. And that's just an opinion. And some believe there is an advantage of growing up in the church. One of the thoughts is that growing up, not involved in religion, you kind of have a freedom of not being intoxicated with traditions that churches may have. And so you come in with a free mind and reading the Bible and then trying to understand, well, why can't you do this? Well, why can't you do that? And you kind of, it's a strain to try to understand why people have some traditions in the church and that they place on other people. And so when you come in, and I remember coming in the Central, the first day we went door knocking. I don't know if Brother Whitfield remember this, but I came and I had a sweatsuit on because in Philly, I mean, that's, you're not getting to no door with no suit because they think you're Jehovah's Witness. And you come to work, right? So I was in a sweatsuit. And I got so many looks saying, well, man, you can't wear that, And I was trying to figure out, I understood why they were saying it because I knew that they just had this different belief than I did. But it's just saying that I didn't see what was wrong. And matter of fact, I thought that, if we have regular clothes on and you put the kids in front of you, people open the door. And so I remember just to show people what I was from where I was. I didn't know how I was in Baltimore. I remember we was door knocking and Niall was with us. And people will open the door for Niall before they open the door for me. Almost every door we went to, they opened the door because a kid knocked on it. So, but, you come into a church, everything is pleated, shirt, tie, uniform, But these are just different ideas that we have. What God is talking about is not putting one on the other, but at the same time understanding how do you unify together, because it also includes wearing a tie or not wearing a tie. There's some things that are uniformed that aren't biblical. It's not biblical that you have to have a tie on or a suit on. You go to Hawaii. We went to Church of Christ in Hawaii. And guess what they had on? Hawaiian shorts and a shirt. I'm talking about the preacher, right? Because that's, so you're talking about cultural differences, and you just got to learn to adapt. And I remember Brother Rupert telling me that he went there, and he had his suit and tie on. He felt so uncomfortable that he was so dressed up that he felt he was overdressed, because of, but they understood that he wasn't from there. And so that's where, that comes in. And so we were discussing differences. So if we look, there's some things I wanted to point out. Let's get Romans. We read it, but I want to just use it as a segue back into what we were discussing. Let's start from verse 7 of Romans 14, verse 7. And you can read to about verse 12.
For none of us liveth to himself, and no man dieth to himself. For whether we live unto the Lord, and whether we die unto the Lord. Whether we live, therefore, or die, we are the Lord's. Mm-hmm. For this is the end. Christ both died and rose and revived, that he might be Lord both of the dead and the living. Mm-hmm. But why doest thou judge thy brother? Mm-hmm. Or why doest thou set at naught thy brother? For we shall all stand before the judgment seat of Christ. Mm-hmm. For it is written, as I live, saith the Lord, every knee shall bow to me, and every tongue shall confess to God.
In verse 12.
So then, every one of us shall give account of himself to God.
Okay. Let's go to Acts chapter 20, verse 6. And the reason we're doing this is to show some interesting things that we can learn about Paul. Now, we know that Paul was a Jew. He was a devout Jew at one point before he became a Christian. He understood the law more than anybody. He had the best teacher. But when we look at Paul's little things that we can point out about Paul, and how he's trying in Romans to get both sides to understand what love is, and that they have differences. It's just amazing how, even though you'll still see some remnants of Paul's roots, okay, and how they mark time, right? And I'm going to continue with other verses, but if you look at verse 7, which says, upon the first day of the week, which is Sunday, when the disciples came together to break bread, Paul preached unto them, ready to depart on the morrow and continue his speech unto midnight. So really, depending on what version you have, if you look at 6, it says, and we sailed from Philippi after the days of unleavened bread, right? How time is being marked with the unleavened bread, and came unto Troas 5 days, where abode 7. So the unleavened bread, that is the Passover. Okay? So they're talking about the Passover, but that's how they mark time. They're still using his roots, his culture, and marking time as he's talking. I want to point something else as we go. Look at Acts 27, verse 9. Acts 27, verse 9. Now, when much time was spent and when sailing was dangerous, because the fast was now already past, and Paul admonished them. I'm just pointing out the fast is the Day of Atonement, because that's the only time that they were commanded to fast, right? You have to know something about the Old Testament to know that fast is the Day of Atonement, okay? And he's using how they mark time. And I want to show you something even more interesting. Let's get Acts 18.
Can I ask you a quick question?
Yes, sir.
On verse 9 there, now the days when the sailing was dangerous, would that lend itself to a time of year, like after the fast?
Yeah. Well, the time of year of sailing, it was the time wasn't safe to go
Right.
in the water. Yeah,
So they
it's a time
had
of
to study to know what month.
well, yep,
Okay.
yeah, yep.
But
Just like they
that's
would.
marking time.
That's marking time. Just like they even know when to go fishing and when not to.
Right.
You know what I mean? It seemed like fishing was at night and not the daytime. So after they fished all night, and then daytime came, and then Jesus says, you know, throw the net out, and they said, well, we've been fishing all night. Can't catch no fish now. Jesus said, throw it over there. So he threw it over there, and he caught fish. And that was profound for Peter because he was a fisherman, and he knew the time you're supposed to fish, right? So you see things marked by time. Just back up a little bit to verse 17. Let me see what 17 is. Verse 17. Is he back there?
Oh, no.
Okay. Then all the Greeks took Xenophanes, the chief ruler of the synagogue, and they beat him before the judgment seat, and Gallio cared for none of those things. Verse 18, and Paul, after this, tarried there yet a good while, and then took his leave of the brethren, and sailed thence to Syria, and with Priscilla and Aquila, having shorn his head in Cenchrea, for he had a what? Why is Paul shaving his head and making a vow when that was a Jewish cultural way of keeping a vow, and he's a Christian?
Well, he's living up to what he talked about, and I think it's probably I read it in the New Testament. It might have been Galatians where he talked about I became all things to all men that I may win some. It's always about the gospel. Regardless of what he was doing, no matter what culture he was in, he was trying to win folk to Christ Jesus.
That's true.
Part of it.
That's part of it, because what are we talking about in Romans 14? We're talking about how we got different cultures, and some things aren't sinful,
That's right.
and some things are sinful to those people who do them, but they're not sinful to anyone else. And I know here's what we say, and I'm not trying to change it, but I'm throwing this out there because this is important for us to understand. Because I'm trying to compare this in a different way to how we will go and worship with somebody else. Now this is not a parallel comparison, okay? But I'm just using it because these are the things that we face, especially when we have somebody that we're in a relationship with, right? You don't want to offend them, so they ask you to come to the church, and you go to their church. You got married people that's one in the body, one not in the body, and they want you to go to their church and want you to do certain things. And then people ask, well, how do I help? How can I lead them if I don't show that I'm willing to go? You know, you get that conversation. And the reason I'm pointing to this, I'm going somewhere with it, but don't try to figure out what I'm thinking. I'm all right. Don't try to answer. If I ask a question, show me what I'm thinking. I'm pointing out Paul's pattern. How Paul just keep a vow, shave his head, and he had to keep the vow that he had to keep, whatever vow he made. Okay, and then I want to show you another one, because I'm showing you that even though Paul was a Christian, and what I'm trying to show you is that, and this is hard for us to balance, how God does not take away your culture. as a Christian. That you can still have your culture. Whereas we were talking about the person that's not in the body, the person that is in the body, and you're trying, and you go into there, and you go in there. That's not culture. Okay? Here is culture. Let's point out something a little bit more. Yes.
I just remembered something about the shaving of the head. It's like part of the Nazarite vow.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Back in, I think Moses' time, Numbers 6, we talk about they shaved their head, they gave it as a dedication to the Lord, and it shows thanksgiving and fellowship, and they would shave it and throw it into the fire as a way of thanking the Lord for what he has done.
Right. Yeah. That's right.
One of the cultural things.
Culture that's in the Old Testament. Right? Number 6 in the Old Testament. There's a lot of things that they did. So Paul's a Christian now. Why is he doing that? Okay, this is where I'm trying to go, and I'm gonna show you something a little bit more, something. I'm gonna show you another scripture that's more in your face than this one. Okay, and just keep in mind about Christianity in different parts of the country, how God is not trying to strip you of culture. Okay, let's turn to Acts 21. We're going to compare this to, we're going to go to Galatians 4, but Acts 21, let's start with verse 18. I need a reader.
And the day following Paul went in with us unto James, and all the elders were present. Mm-hmm. And when he had saluted them, he declared particularly what things God had wrought among the Gentiles by his ministry.
So he's with these Jewish elders, right? And he's talking about what God had done for him in his ministry to the Gentiles. Okay? Verse 20. Pull it up some. Verse 20 at the top. Okay, thank you.
And when they heard it, they glorified the Lord and said unto him, Thou seest, brother, how many thousands of Jews there are which believed, and they are all zealous of the law.
So here's they talking to Paul, and they telling him, listen, man, don't you understand how many thousands of Jews have became Christians now? But guess what?
Still got the law.
They still got the what?
They got the zeal for the law. They still got that.
Because the law was good, right? It's God's law. They lived off of that. Okay, that was their covenant with God, was their law. He said, now there's 1,000 Jews become Christians, but there's another issue. Their culture is still in them. So this is an issue, right? Verse 21.
And they are informed of thee, that thou teachest all the Jews which are among the Gentiles to forsake Moses, saying that they ought not to circumcise their children, neither to walk after the customs.
So you can't, that was a part of the, not only even before the Mosaic law, but they had to circumcise the children, and there were customs. And Paul, what you're teaching the Jews that's amongst the Gentiles, the word is out, is that you're saying that Moses should be forsaken. Okay? Which is true. But it's a problem. Right? We're not under the law. We're not under the Mosaic law anymore. Right? We're not under the 10 Commandments. We're not under the 10 Commandments. We had to worship on Saturday. But loving the Lord thy God with all thy heart and love thy neighbor as thyself wraps up everything in the law. But this is a problem. So how do we fix it? 22, let's pull 22 up to the top. Okay?
What is it therefore? The multitude must needs together come together, for they will hear that thou art come.
They're going to know you coming. They heard you coming, so they're going to come around you. Verse 23.
Do therefore this that we say to thee, we have 4 men which have a vow on them.
Okay?
Them take and purify thyself with them, and be at charges with them, that they may shave their heads, and that all may know that those things whereof they were informed concerning thee are nothing, but that thou thyself also walkest orderly and keepest the law.
So here's what you need to do. You need to show that you have a love for the law of Moses. You need to purify yourself with these 4 men. You need to shave your head. And what else? Come on up. Verse 25.
As touching the Gentiles which believe, we have written and concluded that they observe no such thing, save only that they keep themselves from things offered to idols, and from blood, and from strangled, and from fornication.
They don't have to do the vows. Listen, we need you with these men because you're not going to be accepted if you don't conform or try to. It's the only way that we can keep unity. Because those things are customs. They have become customs now. Right? And there's nothing wrong, or whatever, what's your custom? As long as you understand that there's only one God. Okay? So now he says, listen, tell the Gentiles that they don't have to do that, but it would be great if they can do the other stuff, the ceremonial stuff. Okay? And keep themselves things offered to idols and from blood and strangled and from fornication. If they can do this, this would bring unity. Yes.
Yeah, brother. I mean, we can't even really relate to this. It's very hard because our custom and culture is not that way. We have a culture and religion is a part of it, but for them, religion was
Right.
their culture. It was almost indistinguishable between their religion and their culture because everything they did every single day, every day of the week,
Yep.
month by month, revolved around the things that they had to do towards God. There was so much stuff that became indistinguishable. And so now you're asking these people who
Right.
that's what they've done to abandon that. And that's why it was so hard.
Right.
You may read it and say, well, why couldn't they just, but, it's like, I don't know, I don't even have something to compare it to because we don't have
The only thing we have,
that's intertwined like that.
right, at Overbrook Park, we had some Africans in the congregation. If you go to the Churches of Christ in Africa, depending when you go, they dance and worship. So now my point is that wrong? Because that's their what? That's their culture. So because that's their culture, we come over here and teach you can't dance. That's what we teach. Dancing is a sin. Well, if dance is a sin, I always say it's across the board. That means you can't even dance. No culture can dance. See, it's different than communion. They can't switch out communion. I don't care what their culture is. They got to take unleavened bread and the fruit of the vine. That's what they have to do, right? You can't change that out. That's a command from God. But cultural things like dancing and those kind of things, dress, all those things have a way of challenging the conscience because of the way we was taught. And this is something this is the beginning of, we looking back in Acts when in the infancy of the church, right? These all the problems occurred because there was a change, there was a transformation, yeah.
Yeah, Brother Wilkin, I think, I'm thinking of an example that you brought up, I believe it was last Sunday, about, when you all first came to Central and, the pants.
Mm-hmm.
And, I think where sometimes we struggle is, okay, we understand that that may be the culture at Central, but are they making it into a sin to say that women oughtn't wear pants, shouldn't wear pants, or shouldn't have their arms showing? You understand what I'm saying? There's a difference, and I think for some, because I have relationships with a lot of people from Central, they were actually taught that it was sinful for women to wear pants.
Right, which is wrong.
Which is wrong.
Right.
And so I think, it's very important to make the distinction to say, well, this is our culture, we prefer,
Right,
this type
right.
of dress or whatever the case may be.
A lot of it can come from depending on the minister. And believe it or not, the minister's background plays a part in how the culture of the congregation, especially if you start the congregation, right? It's different. You come into a congregation and then you have to adjust, like Brother Rupert did. He had to make his adjustments at the right time and transition. And now women you can wear a dress, you can, but it took time. But the background of the preacher makes a difference as well because his belief, his conscience, and this is why it's important to study, it won't allow him to teach certain things. You know what I mean? Suppose you come from a Catholic background. Then I'm going to emphasize no clapping. Because in the Catholic Church, you don't do all that, right? So sometimes that can carry over, and I'll find something in Scripture that justifies or verifies my belief. And then you teach it. And so there's no clapping in the churches. And that is one of the things that has happened in the churches of Christ. A lot of people come from the Protestant background. And they've been teaching, they go all the way to the left. With no instrument, no clapping, no nothing, right? And you just sing. So, but it's interesting. Look at verse 26.
Then Paul took them in, and the next day, purifying himself with them, entered into the temple to signify the accomplishments of the days of purification, until that an offering should be offered for every one of them.
So not only did he go and purify, we saw that he shaved his head, he even offered an offering. Now, I'm not equating that to switch out worship services with someone else. That's not what I'm equating that to. But what I'm saying is that as Christians, we got to understand that those people who are not members of the Church of Christ actually believe what they believe. And they have a love for God. They just don't have the knowledge. It's not that they don't love God. They believe God, and they fervent for God, and man, they you know, they show us out sometimes
Yeah, that's true.
of their belief in God. They just don't have the knowledge of God. So you don't shred them apart because they're not members. You gotta be able to adjust and start where you have a common ground that you both believe in God, right? So you can have that conversation. So this is interesting. Paul is not just talking about unity and talking about other people's conscience. He demonstrates it because they told Paul, listen, we need to, there's an issue going on. How are we going to fix this issue? And this is the way we can fix it. You need to shave your head, make this vow, and take these men in with you and go in, and then people will accept you. Then once you accept it, then Paul will be able to teach a little bit better. You know what I mean? I went to Bible studies at other congregations, not Churches of Christ. Baptists, I went to the Bible study with them and tried to, you know, I sat in a Bible study and they was teaching them wrong, and I just, you know, I didn't say anything. I was really there for the other person. But I didn't, if I went in there and started just interjecting Church Christ doctrine, that would have been wrong. Because I was in someone else's house. Okay, that's wrong. We respect those from denominations. We have to deal with it when we do funerals. Now, it'll be a woman. Her name would be Elder Mrs. I don't know, just make up a name, right? She's speaking, or Reverend so and so, and he's speaking, and there are some we will call them by their name because we are conscious of the membership. Because we don't. You call somebody Elder so-and-so. It doesn't mean you sinned. Right? It doesn't mean you sinned Elder so-and-so. They're coming and, you know, you ask to do a funeral for somebody's family member and you're hosting. You're supposed to thank the clergy. Right? See, we don't have the word clergy, right? I want to thank the clergy. I say it.
Right.
You know, this is, you know, it's respect. That's a good word. Just respecting where people are. Right? And it's really, and if we can understand that, then we can understand where we are in different places. Just respect where everybody not in the same place. Right? So we have to respect where people are. And Paul knew how to become a Jew. That's 1 Corinthians 9, 20, 21. That's what the theme, embracing change. Right? You can't pour new wine in old wineskins. You can't put a new cloth on an old garment. Right? It's delicate. It's really delicate. And so we just have to be patient with people, right? But y'all get the picture, right? Let's get Galatians 4. Starting at verse 8. Galatians 4, starting at verse 8.
Howbeit then, when ye know not God, ye did service unto them which by nature are not gods.
Or no gods.
Are no gods. But now, after that ye have known God, or rather are known of God, how turn ye again to the weak and beggarly elements whereunto ye desire again to be in bondage?
So he says, Now that you know God, you came from that. Now you're going back to it, right? He's talking to those Jews who've come, and now you're going back to those things. So now Paul is teaching the other thing, because here's where the delicate comes in. We talked about the weak, the conscience of things that some people view as sin to them, and that's not sin, and they have a weak conscience. And so we ought to be able to adjust to the person with the weak conscience. But there's a flip coin to that. Sometimes we can be controlled by the person that's weak. So do I give in to every weak inclination that you have? Well, you think this is sin? Okay. All right, I'll adjust. Well, you think that's a sin? Okay, all right, adjust. So now if I just sit down, that's a sin. I'm being facetious, right? So when do we, where's the boundary line? You know, where's the boundary line? So in this sense right here, Paul is telling them, why y'all doing that? I'm just showing you the opposite of what he did before, right? Because the situation is different. Let's pull up verse 10.
Ye observe days and months and times and years. I am afraid of you, lest I have bestowed upon your labor in vain. Brethren, I beseech you, be as I am, for I am as ye are. Ye have not injured me at all.
13.
Ye know how through infirmity of the flesh I preached the gospel unto you at the first.
Okay. If you look at verse 9, that's good. Verse 9. But now after that ye have known God, or rather have known of God, how ye turn again to the weak and beggarly elements, whereto ye desired again to be in bondage, because this stuff puts you in bondage. Remember I told you that the less you know about God, the smaller your world gets, right? And Christianity is not a bondage religion.
That's right.
Right? It's a religion of freedom. And he says, now y'all going back to observing all the days and the months and times. So he's talking about the Sabbath and all those things. That's what he's talking about. And I'm afraid of you, lest I have bestowed upon you and labored in vain. All that teaching is for nothing. I'm afraid that you are being reversed back to that old teaching. So here Paul is telling them not to go back.
That's right.
Okay? We have where Paul had circumcised Timothy so that they could be amongst the Jews. And then they tried to say that Titus should be circumcised because he was Greek, and Paul did no. So why circumcise Timothy and not circumcise Titus? Because Paul was trying to teach different things at different times. Okay? Circumcision doesn't mean anything. But in order for them to be in fellowship with the Jews, Timothy being a Jew, well, half, because his father was Greek, needed to be circumcised in order to get inside. But with Titus, Paul took a stance and says, no, he doesn't need to be circumcised because circumcision doesn't mean anything, right? Excuse my voice. Let's go back to Romans. Yes, sir.
As he turned back, he took a stance once they became knowledgeable and converted. Or sometimes, even once a person becomes knowledgeable of something, you can say something because now you built a rapport through trying to teach.
That's right.
I mean, but you can't do it before then because they ignorant. So at that point, you'd be praying for teaching opportunities.
Right, right. So how far, when you have you're talking to somebody about the gospel, how far do you go into the Bible?
Me personally, I've been taught to deal with them based upon where they are at that moment. That's what fishermen teach. moment, that's where you need to start. And it could be just simply something outside the Bible, which in most cases is still something in the Bible about it, but they're just talking about something in general. You know, like a sport, the way they view something downtown or whatever the case may be, you need to meet them right there and try to build a relationship from there. And that's really the introduction to Christianity. They don't know it, but that's what it is, because now you're hearing them out. One of those verses that we leave out sometimes.
Right.
Be quick to hear, slow to speak, slow
Right.
to rap. Hear them out and then go from there.
Right. I know that one of the, did you have your hand?
No, go ahead.
One of the, before I became a Christian and was looking for a Church of Christ, went to Overbrook Park, which was 63rd and Vine Street, and I went in there and I asked the guy, do y'all speak in tongues? Because I didn't believe that you speak in tongues. I just didn't believe it, even though I was at this other denominational congregation. That's where Sister Wilkie was at. And I didn't believe, some of the things that they were teaching. And so tongues was one of the things that they were teaching. And you sitting there thinking there's something wrong with you because you ain't doing it, right? So, you try to copy it so people don't, look at you funny and think you are the devil or something. And I went to Vine Street and I asked him, I said, y'all speak in tongues? That's what I asked him. And the guy, he said, no. He said, I don't know anything about that. He said, we don't speak in tongues here. I was like, okay. I said, do you supposed to? And he said, not that I know of. No, I don't. He didn't say Old Testament, New Testament. He just said, you see what I'm saying? That's the point I'm trying to bring out. He just said, nah, I didn't see that in there. Then leave it up to me to keep asking.
Right.
So why is it saying that? Oh, well, that's because, right? And then you lead your way into it. And so I ended up in a Bible study. I said, well, won't you come back for a Bible study? Maybe we could go over some stuff. So I was like, all right. So that's what you do. You don't have your torch out going to preach to folk. And your sword in the other hand. You got to have some love and compassion where people are, because God saved you.
That's right.
And he gave you time, And when you understand the grace and mercy that you receive, you be compassionate with other people, right? It can be frustrating if somebody you love is not in the body. That can be frustrating. But that becomes your ministry.
That's right.
Ministry starts at home.
That's right.
Yes.
Sometimes, that restraint can be hard. I know personally for me, my parents, Brother Wilkie knows this very well, having discussions about this, particularly with my mom. Well, my dad too, but my mom, she's one of those people who has absolute zeal for God. She
Yeah.
believes the wrong thing. And I have to respect, first of all, I have to respect that she's my mother. Secondly, I have to respect that her zeal is true.
It's genuine, yeah.
It's genuine. And so I've learned that even our conversations, because, I've been spending a lot more time with her. She picks me up from dialysis. And, so we had, a lot more conversations, but I had to, if I'm pushing too hard and I can sense it, she's starting to get irritated or upset, and I've learned to back off. You know what I mean? And not to upset her, but to just keep trying to drop whatever seed I can drop to get her to think. You know what I mean?
Right.
But I'm just saying, in that situation, that's what I learned. With her, with her in particular, because I can't, beating her over the head is not going to make her change.
Right.
What she believes. So.
Right. That'll turn against you. Yes.
Have to remember that it's God who gives the increase,
Mm-hmm.
and not us.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
when we go to study God's word, we gotta make sure that the folk we're studying with, see that we're trying to have a relationship with them. Because just going there to give them the have to establish relationship with the people.
That's right. That's very important because there are times like when you go to study with someone and they believe in baptism, they believe in Jesus as Lord. Now, where's the conversation going?
All right, preacher.
All right, because there's churches, the Christian church, believe that you're supposed to be baptized for remission of your sin. They have the same 5 steps we got. So where do we, there's got to find, so now you have to search that common ground. How can I get in, and then you learn through the studying and how the worship and, with the music and the non-music and they call us the traditional Church of Christ now.
I heard that down south.
And now there's a contemporary, and that's that's the traditional Church of Christ. That's our a cappella brethren.
That's how they say it.
That's how they say it.
Right.
That's our a cappella brethren. This is what we do this. Okay? And I had a guy, preacher, Church of Christ, had a sister leading songs. And this thing was, well, if she's singing in the audience, like everybody else is singing, and there's a mic in front of her, this is what they do. There's a mic in front of her, what's the difference? And since bass micing, there's nothing wrong with bass micing, then why can't the sister have a mic? Why only the brothers can have a mic? There's more parts to the song. Why is the bass amplified and the alto's not? You see what I mean? So, go ahead, and then we'll.
Yeah, I know you got close. But I'm just saying, like I recently asked prayer about the Ethiopian family who was lit. And this guy's a minister in the congregation. He said congregation is like probably about the size of this congregation. And he wants me to come preach.
All right. Go preach.
Right, but I'm just saying, but what would
Right.
you do? Some people would immediately say, I can't do that.
Right.
But to me, if you invite me to preach, that's a golden opportunity for me to preach something from the Word of God.
That's right.
To help shed some light on. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Now the question is, what do you preach, right? That's a long conversation, about that. But I'm just saying,
Right.
he invited me.
Right.
I didn't answer him, you know what I mean? Yet, but I'm just saying, that's the kind of stuff you run into.
Yeah, so you have to, when you go in a place like that, you don't want to preach fellowship.
Right.
That's right.
You got to go in like, this is my last time here.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Right. But I got the opportunity, so we're going to talk about being a new creature in Christ. See? And they be like, yeah.
Because it's new.
Right? And then as you're talking, you're following the word of God, and you're going to get the amens. And the next thing you know, somebody
Yes, sir.
is going to hear what you're saying.
That's right.
Right? Somebody's going to hear what you're saying. So, anyway, we got to close and get ready for worship. What? Huh?
I was just gonna say, that's another conversation that's happening in the brotherhood,
Yeah.
because there's some ministers that, like, nope, you don't go preach in no denominational church.
Right.
You got others that just, the point that Corey made.
Right.
Golden opportunity.
Right. Because Paul went and preached in the synagogue,
He went in there. That's right.
trying to convert people.
That's right.
But is that cultural or is that a traditional teaching that took place? And, these are the differences. But anyway, who has the mic? Can you pray? Because my voice is about gone.
Sure.
Thank you.